Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you've spent any time at all scrolling through the dark corners of the internet, you know you'll eventually hit this chaotic avalanche of viral anomalies. You know what I mean? Unexplained sightings, bizarre digital artifacts, things that just shouldn't exist. Well, today we're going to organize that chaos. We're taking these wild viral claims and transforming them into a structured, case study driven field guide specifically for aspiring paranormal investigators. We're going to look closely at the evidence, analyze the specific techniques used to capture it, and figure out how to actually classify the unexplainable.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a solid taxonomy framework today. 1. Documenting folklore and legends. 2. Poltergeists and invisible forces. 3. Cryptids and unexplained anomalies. And 4. Safe evidence collection protocols.
Section 1. Documenting folklore and legends. Entities tied to historical context. As an investigator, one of the very first things you'll realize is that a lot of these recorded phenomena, they aren't just random. They're deeply tied to historical context and actually directly correlate with regional myths. Take this case study, for example. A motorcyclist is returning home late at night, feels this strange presence, pulls out his smartphone, and captures the outline of a shadowy silhouette just sliding along his walls for several seconds before completely dissolving into thin air. The investigator who reviewed this directly tied the visual evidence to a highly localized legend, the Kuntilanak. In Indonesian folklore, this entity is described exactly as a young woman with long dark hair in a white dress. It's fascinating because the digital footprint matches the historical blueprint perfectly.
Here's another totally wild Indonesian case. We've got a driver stranded alone on a road that is completely washed out by rain. His car is stuck deep in the mud. He checks his rearview camera and sees this tall, pale figure just standing off in the distance. Now, this visual matches the pocong, which is believed to be the soul of a dead person trapped in a burial shroud. But what makes this case study absolutely crucial for our field guide is the behavior of the anomaly. The very second this entity appeared on camera, the driver's car miraculously escaped the mud trap. It suggests that not all entities are hostile, right? Some of them, depending on their localized context, might actually show up to help.
And this brilliantly illustrates why environmental context is absolutely key. Check out this footage captured by Alejandro. He's a dog trainer, just walking his dogs, Zeus and Thanos, down by a lake. Out of nowhere, the dogs just freeze. Their fur stands straight up on end, and they start barking furiously at the dark edge of the trees. Alejandro's camera catches a pale, headless silhouette with these highly distorted proportions, just gliding unnaturally smoothly right above the ground. For his followers, the evidence was undeniable. This was a manifestation of La Llorona, the mystical weeping woman from Latin American folklore. And, the biological reaction of those dogs serves as a fantastic secondary validation to the visual evidence.
We actually see this kind of geographic anchoring everywhere. Up in Central Park, New York, CCTV captured a woman in white sitting on a bench. Locals identified her as Zoe Madison, and get this, she was recorded exactly 5 months after her tragic death in that exact same area. Down in Chihuahua, Mexico, smartphone footage zoomed in on a store mannequin, supposedly the legendary La Pascualita. The footage revealed a texture that was literally identical to human skin, complete with tiny wrinkles and capillaries. And back in New York at Greenwood Cemetery, professional investigators captured a translucent woman in white crying near grave number 478. So the key takeaway for you as an investigator? Always, always cross-reference your sightings with local historical records.
Section 2. Poltergeists and invisible forces, the kinetic entity.
All right, we're shifting our focus here from entities classified by how they look to entities classified by their invisible physical manipulation of the environment. We call these kinetic entities. And let me tell you, kinetic evidence is some of the most striking stuff to document because it leaves an actual physical impact on our reality. We've got a surveillance case study from a cafe where a barista is just making coffee. Her hands are completely dry, yet this heavy bottle is suddenly snatched right out of her grip and thrown across the room with immense force. Even more terrifying is an August 2018 incident from a clothing store in Laos. A security guard goes to investigate some falling clothes, sits down, and is suddenly grabbed by his leg. An invisible force violently drags him across the floor, leaving deep scratches on the tiles before he finally manages to break free. Needless to say, he never returned to work.
Then you have extreme kinetic manipulation, things like temporary levitation. This quote here comes from our analysis of the viral KMGS TikTok footage. In this particular case study, a totally ordinary guy just begins convulsing. Witnesses reported that he gained superhuman strength, literally to the point where his feet lifted completely off the ground. After nearly levitating, he hurled a chair across the room as if it weighed absolutely nothing. Several minutes later, he breaks out into a cold sweat and comes to his senses with total amnesia. This represents a complete, albeit temporary, kinetic override of a biological host.
But sometimes the invisible reveals itself if you know exactly where to look. In a piece of footage famous online as the Nightmare Fuel video, a woman is just walking toward a dining table when her hair is violently yanked backward by an invisible force. It's shocking, but the real investigator's goldmine here is in the background. The reflection in the glass door directly behind her clearly reveals a figure standing there, and chillingly, users in the comments identified the figure in that reflection as an acquaintance of the woman who had recently passed away. It is a textbook example of why you always check reflections for the source of kinetic attacks.
Section 3. Cryptids and Unexplained Anomalies, Defying Classification. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens when our evidence completely defies traditional ghost categories. Here we're exploring anomalies that somehow blend biology, technology, and just bizarre environmental phenomena. Notice how wildly these vary. First, we have an alleged hellhound, a massive, dark dog with a mouthful of unnaturally sharp teeth, documented sniffing lit candles at a roadside ritual site. Then, we have purposeful energy anomalies. Out in Virginia, footage caught a glowing fireball bouncing, striking the ground, and bursting with tongues of flame. But mysteriously, it didn't ignite a single leaf in the forest. And perhaps strangest of all, on March 8, 2025, over in Taiwan, an anomaly that looked exactly like a glowing hologram of a man in a jacket and white shirt hovered over an empty road for 12 solid minutes. No projection source was ever found. None.
And these environmental anomalies, they can become surreal very quickly. Take the case of the living hair grave. Investigators examining an old cemetery captured long, black, hair-like tentacles literally crawling out of the soil. When they approached it, the strands abruptly pulled right back into the earth, but the grave itself was completely untouched. No cracks, no holes, nothing. Or consider the footage of a group of men carrying a massive wooden coffin late at night. They were moving so slowly they actually appeared to be floating, and they completely ignored the blinding high beams of a car passing just a meter away. These are the cases that require investigators to just completely abandon conventional logic. Section 4. Safe Evidence Collection Protocols, Survival and Documentation. Look, documenting these entities is fascinating work, but your survival and safe documentation must be your absolute priority in the field. If we look back at our successful case studies, specific tools consistently capture the best evidence. Outdoor surveillance cameras and smartphone cameras are basically your baseline. High beams on vehicles act as great wide area illuminators, but the professional standard, that remains the EMF field detector. In one prime example, a group of ghost hunters out in a forest spotted a pale, translucent figure sitting on a tree swing, just swaying totally out of rhythm with the wind. Their EMF devices immediately registered a massive, sharp spike in the electromagnetic field, confirming the anomaly was really there. But successfully capturing evidence is really about how you interact with the environment. Let's compare two very different approaches here. On the left, our forest investigators observed that translucent figure on the swing from a safe distance, recorded their EMF data, and left without disturbing it. Perfect execution. On the right, though, we have a catastrophic failure of protocol. A group of friends found an empty, open coffin in a cemetery, and one man jokingly climbed inside. Huge mistake. Immediately, an invisible force grabbed his t-shirt and pulled it violently upward. He later reported feeling an eerie cold and the distinct sensation of his soul leaving his body. The rule is simple: never physically engage with the anomaly. So the crucial point is to follow these 3 steps for survival. Maintain camera focus, do not engage physically, and evacuate immediately if things escalate. A perfect example of this in action is the cemetery caretaker in New Orleans. During his night patrol, he found an 1886 coffin resting entirely above ground on the surface. Suddenly, a hand emerged from beneath it. Now, what did he do? He maintained his camera focus with a trembling hand, documented the evidence, did not engage, immediately evacuated, called the police, and then wisely quit his job. That, my friends, is textbook protocol. As you compile your own field guide and start reviewing your footage, I want you to remember the case of abandoned place explorer Jin Aboud. He was filming inside an empty school when he suddenly froze. Just a few meters away, a dark figure was standing perfectly still. But it wasn't just existing in the space, it was staring intently back at the blogger. It forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question.
As we take our cameras into the dark to document the unknown, are we merely observers? Or is the unknown beginning to observe us? Keep your cameras rolling, stay safe out there, and never stop questioning what you see.